to take dehydrated food and make it where it can be kept fresh in a full packaging. Now, it was originally used to make dog food, but they thought, why not give it to people? And they began to do so, and they came up with an idea of taking this dehydrated food, putting it inside a tart-shaped pastry, and because toasters were really popular in the 1960s, but all they really did was toast bread, why not be able to pop them in the toaster, and you'd have a nice treat for in the morning. And we all know that as country squares. No, we don't, right? That's not what we know it as. You see, that's actually the first thing that was developed. Post came up with this idea for country squares, but they made a mistake. They were so excited about this product, they decided to advertise it before they had finished developing it. And their rivals at Kellogg's heard about it and decided to steal the idea. So they hired someone who used to be a former employee of Post, ironically also named Post, and gave him 4 months to come up with their version of it. And because of the pop art movement of the day, he called his new creation Pop-Tarts. And Kellogg's were able to get Pop-Tarts on the shelves before Post was able to get country squares on the shelves. And as they say, the rest is history. Pop-Tarts were so well received that they sold out of their entire stock in 2 weeks and had to advertise to the country that we're sorry we messed up, we'll make more. But all that did was make it even more popular. And today, Pop-Tarts are one of the best-selling breakfast foods there is. It wasn't because country squares wasn't a good idea. It wasn't because they didn't come up with it in a timely manner. It was because they didn't have their timing right. They introduced it before they could release it, and in doing so, missed out on possibly one of the greatest corporate overthrows that they could have had. And rather than replacing their rival, they gave their rival a billion-dollar industry. You know, this month we have been looking about becoming more fruitful with our time and how we should be using our time more wisely. But sometimes with time, the problem is our timing's wrong. I don't know how many times I've seen programs in the church that have failed, not because it wasn't a good idea, not because it wasn't something that needed to be done, but it was just not the right time. Leadership would think, what's wrong with people? Why won't they get involved? Why aren't they excited about this? But there was just something about the timing that didn't work. It may not have nothing to do with the nature of what's going on or even the quality. Sometimes it's just not the right time. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 5 and verses 5 and 7, "For a wise heart knows that there is a proper time and procedure. For there is a proper time and procedure for every delight, though a man's trouble is heavy upon him. No one knows what will happen. Who can tell him when it will happen?" Solomon realizes there's a time and a place, a right time and a right place for everything. Even though our lives are hectic, even though things are bothering us, there's still a time and a place for everything. But it's figuring out that timing, isn't it? You know, sometimes our timing is we want it right here, right now, just the way we want it. But that's not always the case of how things work out. If that's how we think things should go exactly when we want it, well, we're going to live a very disappointed and frustrated life. Sometimes it comes down to doing things at the right time, which makes us think about God's timing. When we consider God's timing, when we consider what God has done and maybe when He has done it, it helps us to understand the great and wonderful nature of our God. Think about when God sent His Son, Jesus, at just the right time. Why did He choose that period 2,000 years ago to send His Son? Sin had been in the world from the beginning, but yet He waited until just a certain time in history. Now you can look at that in a historical perspective and you can see why it was such a good idea. The Roman Empire had conquered the known world. The Pax Romana, the peace of the empire, had allowed a time when the gospel could spread easily and quickly. It was a great time. But we also have to consider why God has done it. In our scripture reading this morning, we read about Paul's statement that Jesus Christ, that great mediator between God and men, came at the proper time. A testimony given at the proper time. That word there in the original language, it means a proper functioning time. Literally, it can be translated like the American Standard does, in his own time. What does that mean? You know, we think about people that have a great sense of timing. A comedian who is just perfectly says a joke that if anybody else said it wouldn't be funny, but he hits it at just the right note at just the right time, and the audience rolls in laughter. We think about a cook who just has everything ready just at the right time, who puts the ingredients in just at the right time so it comes up with that perfect flavor, and their timing is just amazing. We think about great communicators who know what to say and when to say it. We've always felt that way, right? We figure out what to say, but it was like 2 weeks later when we're in the shower, and we think, if I could have said it then. But great communicators are that person who know just what to say, just when to say it. They have a sense of timing. And that's exactly what this passage is telling us about God. He has a sense of timing. When He is ready to do it, it will be the perfect time. It's a similar thought to what we read in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. When it says, when the fullness of time came, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law. When the fullness of time came. The visual phrase that's used here in the original language is a container that you're filling with water. And it's when it's right to the perfect top. In other words, it is filled up. It is when all the pieces come together to be the exact moment, right? When everything is done to put it together, and at that moment you know it's where it's supposed to be. God sent His Son at that moment, at the fullness of time, when it was perfect. When everything had been set up, when everything had been brought together, God brings His Son. It's similar to what we read in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 10. When it says, in a view to the administration suitable to the fullness of time, that is, the summing up of all things in Christ, things in heaven, things on earth in Him. When everything was in its right place, when everything was set up like it was supposed to be, when everything had come together, God sends His Son. His perfect timing. Everything was where it needed to be, so God sent forth His Son. So what can we learn from God's timing? You hear that phrase sometimes, strike where the iron is hot. We use that phrase to describe when the opportunity is there, we need to act upon it. But not only do we need to strike when the iron is hot, but we need to not when it's not. You see, too many times in our life, we react to something when it's not ready to be done. We say something too soon or too late. But what we see with the timing of God is something that we need to look for as well, is when the opportunity comes, when things are set up, we need to take advantage of them. Colossians chapter 4 and verse 5, it tells us, conduct yourself with wisdom towards outsiders, making the most of the opportunity. You see, God acted when mankind needed Him. At the fullness of time, when everything was completed, when all that was done that needed to build up to it was done, but before everything that was needed to follow was to come, He acted at the right time. And we need to think the same way. While we have opportunity, make the most of that opportunity. Striking, doing, when the time is right. That requires us to be attentive. It requires us to be conscious of what's going on around us, and it requires us to think of others at just the right time. How else can we consider God's timing? Let's turn to another verse. Romans chapter 5 and verse 6. Here it tells us that while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. Here it talks about us while we were sinners, while we were estranged from God. You know, most people, they'll do something for someone who's good, right? who someone is deserving. But the difference with God's timing was while we were helpless, when we couldn't do it for ourselves, God acted. Christ died for the ungodly at the right time when it was needed. I remember when we first had Maggie. We were at the hospital and the nurse came in, and right after the delivery she said, I want to give you some advice. She said, tonight you're going to want to hold your child. You're going to want her to stay in the room with you every moment. You're going to stay up the whole night looking at her cute little fingers and her cute little toes, and you're going to do that. She said, but let me tell you this. She said, there's a whole hospital staff waiting to help you out. And she said, you're going to need your rest. You're going to need some things. She says, because in a couple days, you're going to go home and none of us are going to be there. And you're going to desperately wish you had some time to sleep, some time to recover. So she said, tonight, take advantage of the people that are here to help you because they're not going to be here in a few days. And she was right because they didn't come home with us, no matter how much I tried to get them to. Because I was ready for those nurses to change those diapers, right? Because at that moment, I was going to be helpless. That's when I was going to need it. You see, Christ died for us when we needed it. When we were at the lowest point, when we were our weakest, He came to die for us. You see, that shows us the sense of God's timing. That He had a purpose for us when we were weak, when we looked useless, when no one else would look at us and say, they're not worth saving. At that time, Christ died for us. Because He saw in us, even at that time, we could be something greater. Paul writes to Titus in Titus chapter 2 and verse 14, "It's Christ who gave Himself up to redeem us from every lawless deed, to purify for Himself a people of His own possession, zealous for good deeds." Notice what he says there, that Christ gave Himself up. He saw us as something in the junk pile that looked dirty and ruined and to be thrown away, but He said, I can do something with that. I can buy it out of that waste and mire. I can clean it up and purify it, and I can make it something that'll do something good. I can bring it into me, and I can make something of it. That's exactly what God has done for us at just the right time, when we needed it the most. So what can we learn from this passage about God's timing? You know what they say when it comes to the stock market? Buy low, sell high. When it's low, that's when you get it. So then it has something to grow. You know, most people, they do that. When the stock is hot, they go, ooh, I heard about this hot stock that's growing. I'm going to go buy it. Well, price is up then, right? What did God do? He looked at people not when they're at their best and said, oh, I want them. But when they're lowest, and He said, I can do something for them. He saw the potential for growth. He saw that it could be redeemed, it could be remade, it could be made into something more. My first job, I lived in the Metroplex of Dallas and Fort Worth. And you know what the worst part about living down there is? It's the traffic. And at that time, they were in the process of, right by my apartment, they were redoing the Mixmaster, where two of those interstates come together and they mix together and everybody goes their opposite directions. And as they're building this thing and they say, you know, it's going to be finished in the next 5 or 6 years. And I lived down there 3 years and they never got it finished. But as I knew some people that were working on that, they said, do you realize that when this thing is done, it will already be obsolete? They said because by the time it takes to build that thing, the traffic patterns in that area change because everything's growing and moving. And by the time they figure out, okay, all these people are coming this way and they need to go this way, so here's how we need to design the road, everybody ends up going in a different direction. Because by the time they're constructing, everybody avoids these roads because, you don't want to go down there, the traffic's too bad, so they go another way. And pretty soon where all the traffic's flowing is not now where they've built this nice new interstate. Because they weren't doing it at the right time, where it was needed. They weren't thinking ahead to the future. They weren't thinking what could be. And maybe that's what we need to do as well. That we look at others and we look at issues and realize that even though it may not seem like it, it might be the right time to do something. The right time to help, the right time to reach out. Too often we think about evangelism as to people who don't really need it. Let's go get those people who are all well together. That's what we need. No. Christ died for the ungodly, the helpless. Maybe we need to think the same thing about God's time. Build so we can fill it, rather than build because we need it filled. Looking to a future, looking to what could be, maybe instead of what is. How else can we consider God's timing? Let's look at 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verses 14 and 16. In the previous verses, we look at God's timing in things he has done, but this verse tells us about things that he's going to do. It says that you keep the commandments without stain or reproach until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ, which we will bring about at the proper time, who is blessed and sovereign, the King of kings, the Lord of lords. Here it talks about how Christ's appearing is going to occur at just the right time, at the proper time. In other words, he's telling us that when Christ comes back, it will be exactly when it needs to happen. Not a second before, not a second too late. His timing is perfect. Everything will be done perfectly in his time. But maybe not our time. You ever been at the house and you get that phone call and somebody says, "Oh, we're just coming to your town. We wanted to see if you were there. Can we come over and visit?" And you think, "Sure, come on over." And you hang up the phone and you immediately yell at the family, "We got to put this place up," right? And we start running around like the flight of the bumblebee thing, trying to throw everything in closets and move everything so we don't look like we're the slobs that we are, right? And then the people come over and say, "Oh, come on in, come on in." They say, "Pardon the mess, pardon the mess. I know it looks bad," but you're thinking in your thought, "This is the cleanest our house has been in months." Because we're not ready. We think, nobody's coming. We don't worry about it until it happens, and then we get in a panic and say, "We got to get this thing right." But that's how too many people think about the return of Christ. We think about it as being, well, it'll happen later. But Jesus tells us that that's the thing we can't do. In Mark chapter 13 and verses 32 and 33, he says, "Of that day and that hour no one knows, not the angels in heaven nor the Son, but the Father alone. Take heed, keep on alert, that you do not know the appointed time will come." There is a time when Christ will return, and that time will be exactly the right time. But that does not mean that we know that time. Just because the time is set doesn't mean that we have an appointment card. And we don't need one. Because Christ's return will happen at his time when he sees fit, not when we see fit. How many people today look at the world and say, "Well, Christ has got to come back. Look at the world today." Or we think to ourselves, "Well, Christ can't come back because I have too much I still want to do." But what does this passage tell us? To keep the command without stain and reproach. Why? Because when he comes, we want to be ready. We can't predict when he's going to come. We won't be given a call ahead of time. So we need to be less concerned about when it's going to happen and being ready for it. What can we learn about God's timing? It will happen when it happens, so we need to be ready. When it comes to things in our life, maybe we need to adopt that same approach. We don't always know when the best time for something will be. But when the time comes, we'll be ready to take advantage of that opportunity. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verses 1 and 2, "Cast your bread on the surface of the waters, so you will find it after many days. Divide your portion to 7 or even 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth." Solomon, in his rather pessimistic way, says, you need to diversify. Cast your bread on many waters. You need to have a lot of options available because you don't know what's going to come. You don't know what's going to happen. But you do know something could happen, so you need to be ready for it. Don't wait around until it's pressing and you can't get it done before it's too late. Be ready. Be prepared. Sometimes we don't do that, right? We know that freezer's about to go out. But we put it off. And then when it goes out, we're thinking we're stuck with all these things. What are we going to do? We know that air conditioner's getting pretty old. But we wait around until it's the hottest time of the summer and then go, "Oh no, what are we going to do?" We don't find ourselves in a state of readiness. We're not thinking about what is to come. We're just trying to figure out when it's going to go instead of being ready. But when it comes to important things, we need to be ready. And what could be more important than being ready when Jesus Christ returns? Because when he returns, it will be the proper time, the time of judgment. Do we find ourselves ready? Aren't we glad we work on God's time and not our own? Because God works at the right time, right when it's needed, right when it's proper, not too early, not too late, right when it needs to be done. His timing helps us to understand how we should use our own. His timing helps us to realize that he is truly God and sovereign. He's in control, and we're not. It should remind us to trust in God's timing and know that he has a plan and a purpose, and his will be done. This time of year we think a lot about the resurrection. And it's always struck me as odd because we think about the resurrection and we think of the 3 days. From the time that Christ dies to the time that he's raised again. And throughout Scripture we see a foreshadowing to this 3 days. But why? You know, in Matthew chapter 12 and verses 39 and 34, when the people were asking for Jesus for a sign to prove himself, though he had shown them many signs, he says, "And a wicked and adulterous generation asked for a sign." In other words, the lowest common denominator is to know when it's going to happen, right? To have that proved. But he says, "No sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah, who for 3 days and 3 nights was in the belly of a sea monster. So then the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." He says it'll be Jonah. Jonah spent that 3 days and then he was given freedom. But the Son of Man is going to spend 3 days as well. Jesus talked about this a lot. When he was in the temple and he was clearing out the temple, they asked him, "Who do you think you are? By what authority do you do this?" And Jesus says to them in John chapter 2 and verse 19, "I will destroy this temple, in 3 days I will build it up." What was he talking about? He wasn't talking about the physical temple. They said it took 46 years to build this temple. How are you going to rebuild it in 3 days? But Jesus wasn't talking about that temple. He was talking about the temple of his body. And later when he's resurrected, his disciples remember this, right? They remember this and they realize what he was foreshadowing, what he was talking about. Jesus talked about this 3-day period so much so that even his enemies, when he had died, they said in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 63, "We remember when he was alive, the deceiver said, 'After 3 days I'm going to arise.'" He had ingrained in these people it was going to be 3 days. But why 3 days? Why not 1 day? Why not the moment he came down from his cross and they knew that he was dead and they had pierced his side and they knew he was dead, that he could be risen up again for all to see? But no, it was 3 days. Why not the day after? So no one had to worry. So the disciples who were so unsure, who were so disheartened that they would be lifted up. But no, they had to wait another day and another morning. Why 3 days? Because that was just the right time. I don't know all the reasons of the in and outs, but I do know it was. Because that's what God did. At just the right time, he took tragedy and made it triumph. He took despair and made it into hope. He took the wicked actions of mankind and used it to save them from their sin at just the right time, at the proper time. A testimony to all. Maybe today you find yourself in one of those 3 days. That Friday was a whirlwind. That night at midnight he's taken to jail. His disciples abandoned him. He's put on trial. He's beaten. He's scourged. All these things that happened to him. Finally he's taken to that cross and he's crucified. Could you imagine a day like that Friday? Maybe your day's like that Saturday. A day that we don't have much recorded at all. Nothing. A day of wondering and waiting. What's going to happen? What's going on? What's been doing? Or maybe it's Sunday. A Sunday morning when you wake up and you realize that something special has happened. What you thought you were going to do is completely changed because the tomb is empty and the world had changed and something far greater had come about. Maybe you find yourself on a Friday in a whirlwind of despair. Maybe you find yourself on a Saturday waiting and wondering. Maybe today is your Sunday, a day to be reborn, a day to start over, a day when the tomb will not hold us any longer, a day when salvation is brought forth, a day when God's plan is fulfilled. Maybe you find yourself today needing to obey. Maybe you find yourself today needing to change. Maybe today can be a new start, and it's the perfect time. Because God's time for you to listen and obey is right now. It's not tomorrow. It's not yesterday. It's now. Every day we need to listen. Every day we need to follow. Every day we need to make sure that we're one of His. So today, if you find yourself outside of Christ, if you've never been born, died, born, and born again in the grave of baptism, or maybe as a Christian you have been wondering, waiting, not trusting in God, and you need to make a change in your life, we offer you a chance to do so right now while we sing this song of invitation.